Hi everyone, I'm Sandeep. I'm the radar specialist in the upper air observations team. So I work in operations. So my presentation is on the operational management of the Met Office radar network. The theme that I'm focusing on for this presentation is processes, so how we actually manage the day-to-day running of the weather radar network. So in my presentation, I'll be giving a quick network overview, how we report faults and implement changes across the network, the radar network coverage requirements, how all the different radar teams work together in the Met Office. I'll be going through an example to highlight the processes that we have in resolving faults and how different teams are working together, the radar hardware management, and a little bit about the lifecycle management.
Yes.
I will just quick. Okay, great. Thank you. So I was going to give a quick overview of the Met Office radar network. So we have 15 sites across the UK, but we also ingest data from 3 other Met Office sites to use in our composite. So from Met Erin, we received data from Shannon and Dublin radar. Shannon, of course, has recently been replaced with a dual pole radar. We also manage the radar in Channel Islands, so it's identical to the Met Office radars, and the data is used in the composite. All our sites are dual pole and Doppler capable. Just a quick run through of what the radar R&D team work on. So the software that actually runs the radars is called Cyclops, and the data processing is done in RadarNet, and that's all in-house designed. We have a radar hardware team who have designed the radars, and they have created the maintenance required for the sites. And again, that's in-house designed. We have field service engineers across the UK, so we refer to them as FSC. So we've got 9 field service centres across the UK, and they complete 6 monthly maintenance. And just a little bit about the hardware at site. So in all our cabins, where we hold the comms equipment and the transmitters, that's air conditioned. The radomes are not temperature controlled, but we do complete 3 yearly maintenance on them, and that's done by an external company. So that's kind of the only part of the maintenance that's done externally. So how do we report faults and implement changes in the network? So we use ServiceNow, which is a third-party platform for IT services and operations. So we have licenses which have been purchased, and ServiceNow is used across the Met Office and by many teams. So when anything's done on ServiceNow, it's visible across the office, and that's the main reason, well, the main benefit of it. I just wanted to run through the different types of tickets that we create on ServiceNow for the radar network. So we create incidences if there's been any degradation to the quality of the data from the radar site, or if there's just been a lack of data. And in the incident ticket, it's a great opportunity for us to collate information on how we've, on our fault finding, and we can also state the priority of the incident to show how important it is to actually resolve. We then have problem tickets. So that's if there's a known problem in the network, which we might have to kind of live with for the next year or so, but also if there's been multiple incidences. So that's where we can find out the root cause of it. We also create change tickets, and that's really important for us for when we're turning a radar off for a day. So for example, when we have maintenance at a radar site, we would create a change ticket, and it goes through the approval process, so to make sure that we can actually turn the radar off at that site, and also it's visible across the office. The benefit of the change tickets is that it's an opportunity for us to think about how we're going to implement the change. and why we actually need the change to actually happen. So if there's a modification that we need to do. And it's also an area where we would state the backup plan. We also use Jira, so that's used for software development and tracking changes. So if I ever have a request for the R&D team for any modification or more information on Cyclops, that's where I would create a ticket. And there's also another third-party platform called Concept Reach. So that's another area where we report faults, and that's more for the site infrastructure related issues. So if there was a problem with the fencing around a radar site or the tower itself, the generators, that's the area where we report that fault. I just want to run through the incident priorities. So again, the incidences are if there's a lack of data or a change in the quality of the data from a radar site, and we create the incident ticket. The way we choose the priority is dependent on the fault. So if, for example, there was an issue with the backup comms link, so the 4G link, but the radar site was still running, that's when we would put a priority of low. So it could be worked on from Monday to Friday. For a medium priority, that would be if there was a single site outage, but that's during a non-critical weather event. So we're always thinking about the actual weather event that's happening, and that determines how quickly we need to resolve a fault. So for high priority, that's if there was a loss of all data across the network, or if there was a single radar outage during a valid warning event. So for the storms that we've recently had, if there was an outage, that would have had high priorities to ensure that everyone in the office is aware that that needs to be resolved quickly, and then we can get resource behind that. The on-call hours are all dependent on the weather situation and what's happening in other observing networks. So there could be something more critical in the VA LiDAR network, for example, that needs to be resolved before a radar issue. The radar network coverage requirements. So in the day-to-day running of the radar networks, we're not solely thinking about individual sites, we're thinking about the network as a whole, because that's the product that we're providing to our customers. And the coverage requirement is dependent on the weather situation. So for example, if there was a red rain, snow or thunderstorm warning, we would need 99% coverage over that warning. And then we have a target of down to 80% if there was no weather warnings. We don't really ever get to 80%, it's always well above that, but that's the target. And this is just an example of when there was a yellow thunderstorm warning in Northern Ireland. The green area shows the data that we had during that day, which is covering most of the composite, but you can see that the white area here is where there was no data. So there was an issue with Hill of Dudwick that day. But what I wanted to highlight here is that we did have coverage over the weather warning, and that's kind of how we're running the network. So how do the radar teams work together? So we're not actually all in the same department. So the radar R&D team, so Tim Darlington's team, is in programs. And then we have the hardware team and the operation teams in technical services. So in terms of how we actually work together, so if there was a change to the receiver, the R&D team would kind of start that process to see its implications to the data, and then that will be passed on to the radar hardware team, so Chris Sloan's team, to figure out the implications to operations. So how would we actually use that receiver at site, and how would the field services engineers, for example, actually get the receiver up the tower? So it's things like that they're thinking about. And then both teams would create instructions and give me training on how to troubleshoot receiver faults. and then that filters through to the first line of support, which is the shift leaders. So they're running 24/7, and I've provided documentation for them on a few ways to troubleshoot faults at radar sites. I was going to run through an issue that we had in the summer at Thurnham Radar, but I wanted to highlight the process of actually resolving the faults. So when there's a lack of data from a radar site, the first line of support will get an alert showing that there was a lack of data from Thurnham, and then they will create an incident ticket. Because it was an outage at one site, it would be medium priority, and then they would inform the customers of the lack of data. And then they do some troubleshooting, and they would have noticed that there was a Pentec issue seen in the Cyclops software, which runs the site. So Pentec is the data acquisition and processing card within the receiver. And they found that there was a workaround that if they just restarted the software, they can get everything back up and running, and then they resolve the incident. And where I come into this in second line of support is this issue started to become more frequent. So it started happening 2-3 times a week, but then there'll be periods of 10 days where it didn't happen. So I would raise a problem ticket so I can collate all the information from previous incidences and start to get a better understanding of what's actually happening. So I would gather information from all the monitoring pages, all the logs from the servers to get a better image of what's happening. So at this point, all I could find was that there were Pentec errors in the Cyclops logs, and I couldn't find any issues in the monitoring pages. So then I go to third line of support for some more assistance, and that's where the radar R&D team thought it was likely to be a radar hardware fault, and because it was quite a different issue, the hardware team had created instructions for the field service engineers to check when they go to site. So when I create, so when engineers are actually going to site and have to turn the radar off, I have to create a change ticket to make sure that everyone in the office is aware that there's going to be an outage at the site. Again, customers are informed of this. During this site visit, the engineers didn't find any issues with the slip rings, and they didn't find any loose connections. So we were still a bit unsure of what was happening. And then I would have a wash-up meeting with the supporting teams, and it was decided that the receiver needs to be replaced. So there's a lot of teams involved, and it requires a lot of communication between us. And after the receiver was swapped, I would monitor Thurnham radar to see if we had any incidences over the following weeks, and we'd resolve the issue. So I'd collated all the information, the problem ticket, and resolved it. So it's really important for us to keep the tickets up to date, because then in the coming years, I can look back on it and see that there was a Pentec issue and this is how we resolved it. Radar hardware management. So we have a stores team, and they manage the radar spares and the repairs of components. They engage with different suppliers to manage any obsolescence, and they also keep an eye on the stock levels. So if a certain component reaches its minimum stock level, that's when we start ordering new parts in. Again, this is an area where we use ServiceNow. So we add tags. So this kind of blue tag here on the magnetron, you can see we've added tags to certain components. So we can either, if they hold value, but it's a way for us to track their history, their repair history, know what part it is, where it's installed, and how long it's actually been installed. So it feels like basic information, but ServiceNow really helps us to collate it all in one place. This is an example of a slip ring asset, just to show what information is actually held So the SM badge is kind of how it's been tagged. So the slip rings are refurbished in-house. So here we would collect the information on how it had been refurbished and all the test results. It shows that it's currently in use and that it's been installed at Hamilton Hill Radar, when it was actually installed. And I've recently been making more use of this replacement due date. So the slip rings we're preventively replacing between 4 to 4.5 years. So this creates automatic reports and sends it out to the engineers, and then they can figure out resource for the next few months, because they know that there's slip ring replacements required at the next few sites in the coming year. Life cycle management. So we have a monthly radar management group meeting. So we have all the supporting managers attend. So for example, the engineering manager will attend and discuss any resourcing issues, because it really helps me to plan the following month. So if I know there's a lack of resource in the southeast of England, and it's not urgent, I might shift that to the following month. And also it helps me if there's any upcoming issues that come up, I'm aware of who's actually able to help with that. I also run through all the problems that we've had in the last month, and it's a really great place where I can discuss how we've resolved problems, if there's any trends, and they might pick up on certain things where maybe a process needs to be updated. Maybe we should be doing something differently. We have 3 monthly lifecycle management meetings. That's where the radar team managers and the product owners discuss the next few years, and it's a space to make sure that everyone's kind of keeping on track, and a place where everyone understands the upcoming network requirements. So in summary, we use ServiceNow to make sure that everyone in the office is informed of any issues with the radar network, and if there's any planned work, so everyone can be kept informed. And also it's a great way for all the radar teams to keep in contact with each other, and we're able to look back on faults over the last few years so we can see trends and then plan the future. And thank you for listening. Are there any questions? Oh, this is an image of Clee Hill Radar. It's one of my favourite pictures. One of the engineers took a drone to site, and yeah, thought it's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you, Sandeep. I'm Corey, if anyone. 50 radars, how many field engineers do you have? And how many site visits in average do you do per year for maintenance, so preventive site visits and those accidental breaks? I guess you have some kind of statistics of this.
Yeah, so we've got around, it's between 25 to 30 engineers across the UK, and there's 9 service centres. So each service centre manages between 1 to 3 radar sites, so they're kind of in charge of those. But because of all the radar sites are identical, it means that an engineer for one service centre can help in Scotland, for example. In terms of how many visits we have, so we have one 6 monthly visit for the routine maintenance, but there are also other planned visits. So we have a property team, and they have also a 6 monthly visit to maintain the generators, the towers, UPSs, things like that. In terms of incidences, it varies month to month. So there could be a month where we have kind of 10 to 15 incidences, but that doesn't mean there's a lack of data. We create incidences even if there's an issue seen on our monitoring pages, because then we can see the start of a fault before it leads to an outage.
Hi, Hassan from Leonardo. Question, with all these 14 or 15 radars, are you also sorting some intelligence information from the parts in the meantime before failure? Do you have also, like, are you creating statistics based on the failures?
Yeah, so we're always looking at, so we're recording when parts are being replaced, and then having a look at since radar renewal, which was done around 5 years ago. Since then, how many parts are we replacing? And then we can kind of plan the next few years. So we're looking at it since radar renewal. And that's where ServiceNow is really helpful as well. So you can see the movement of assets through different sites when there was a failure, and how often we're having to refurbish parts.